What's up, guys, and welcome back to MoAn Inc. If you guys are new here, then hello! My name is Erica, and it is a pleasure to have you joining me today on the channel. Because for today's video, as you can see from the title, we are going to be chatting about Hesiod, our lovely main man, Hesiod. But before we can get into that, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future. And now that you've so kindly done that, let's get into the video. Hesiod is a name I think I have mentioned, God, maybe like 150,000 times on the channel, not to be like too dramatic, but also like to be a little bit dramatic. We are constantly referencing Hesiod. He is a big player from the ancient Greek world. So I thought that today I could kind of explain a little bit as to why he is considered such a big player, because I don't think I've done that. I did Homer, but I don't think I've done Hesiod. So today we are going to explain him. Very little is known about Hesiod aside from his birthday. In fact, absolutely nothing is known about Hesiod aside from that he is Boeotian or Boeotian, whichever one you choose. No Greek people are correcting me. In fact, Greek people are saying it could be both. So there's that. But either way, he's from there in Greece. That's all we know. That's about it regarding Hesiod the man. Hesiod the text, though, let's get into that. We do know the sort of time period that he was writing from, and that is around the same time as Homer, the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey. So we date Hesiod to around 700 BC or BCE, depending on which year classification you prefer. Sort of 700, 750-ish is where we stick Hesiod on the timeline, which, like I said, is very close to Homer. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is because this is going to sound so lame, but like, welcome to my world. There is quite a large scholarly debate that has been going on for like forever to figure out who is the elder of the two, of Homer or Hesiod. Now, traditionally, we do say that Homer was the first. We say that Homer came along, he wrote everything down, and then Hesiod follows very shortly after. So these are the two, we'll go into Hesiod's works in just, one moment, but these are the two sort of earliest epic Greek poems that we have, well, two authors of epic Greek poetry. Why am I struggling so much today? You know what I mean? Okay, so they're from around the same period, but there are a lot of debates that are going on of who is the elder. Now, traditionally we've said it's Homer. However, later on, and in sort of, I want to say the last like 20 years in particular, there is a lot of really interesting scholarly work that is being done to kind of suggest and to maybe prove that Hesiod was first. Is this going to impact your lives? As of right now, it's not going to impact you. The deeper you get into this world, that question of who is older will honestly plague you, and it will be very large indeed. Regardless of who came first, Hesiod is just as authoritative as Homer. He has two surviving works to us today that are extant, right? So the first of which is the Theogony, and the second of which is Works and Days. Now these are teeny tiny texts. They are so thin. You could literally read them, I think, in maybe like max like an hour each, okay? This is not big reading. In fact, if you want to start with like some epic poetry and Homer's intimidating and you haven't watched my series yet, which like, it's okay, I'll forgive you this one time, then you could definitely sit down by yourself and read Hesiod. The Theogony is more so a like lineage line, that was really redundant. It's very much like the family tree of the gods, and he explains it all the way from the idea of chaos, and from chaos comes everything, and he sort of goes into Gaia and Uranus and all of that kind of stuff, all of those primordial deities, all the way down to like literally every single god and mythological character you could think of, Hesiod mentions in this long line. Now, of course, we don't get down into these like mortal heroes. That comes in Works and Days. So Works and Days is really interesting because what Hesiod does is he actually wrote this poem and dedicated it to and wrote it for, he directly addresses his brother Perses. And it's really about farming. That doesn't sound really thrilling, but like, bear with me. It's really about farming, and it's about sort of like the times of the year and all of that kind of stuff, whilst also weaving in a lot of these more mythological stories as well. So the story of Pandora comes up in Works and Days. That's where we get it from. But we do have a lot of other things that are referenced, in particular the ages of man, and all of that is tapped into Works and days. Though these are the two works that survive to us by Hesiod, these are not the only two works that he wrote. There are a number of other works that have been circulated that are obviously all fragmentary, so we don't really know, but a lot of people have attributed these previously to different authors, and now later on we do believe that they were by Hesiod, but those are all very hotly debated. Again, it's very difficult to see when it comes to fragmentary work whose, lines belong to who. And that's also something that actually we see with the Theogony in particular. There are many sections of the Theogony that are just slightly different and we think have been added later by different writers. Those aren't super large areas, but there are the odd lines that scholars have looked at and said are just a little bit different from the rest of the poem, which indicates that people have come back later and inserted these lines, whether it's because the original ones were lost and people are correcting them, or whatever it happens to be. Maybe the author who wrote them down actually changed them slightly, and they have come later on. Those sorts of things, it is very tricky to settle, but there are certain stark differences in the Greek between some sections and some other sections of the Theogony. In fact, what's really interesting about the Theogony is that originally it was not attributed to Hesiod when it came down to us and when we found it. That actually was attributed to somebody else entirely. People were really doubtful that it was to Hesiod, and then the more that we kind of came to understand his language and his verbiage as well, that debate has just died. People don't debate it anymore. We are pretty 100% certain. We're 100% certain that this is by Hesiod. And I love those sorts of stories of figuring out who wrote what and why things are super important and all of that kind of stuff. So I wanted to pass that on to you. Where the Theogony is around 1,000 lines of hexameter styled poetry, we then have works in days, which is just over 800 lines. I think it's around 820 lines. Now this, I understand on paper, doesn't necessarily sound like an epic poem. I think the episode prior to this one that I'm uploading, I'm not really sure because I record these all in one go, but I'm pretty sure you guys already have Nonus. That's massive, obviously. And then we've already discussed as well Homer years ago, where we've gone into that book, and that's significantly more than these two teeny tiny works. So I know that there's going to be the question in a lot of people's minds of what exactly epic then means when it comes to these poems that we have from the ancient world, because surely epic just means long. I think in cinema we've kind of changed the meaning of that word, because in cinema, if it's epic, it means that it's big and there's sort of CGI and it's like this crazy story. And in the ancient world, that's not really how we use epic to describe epic poetry. It's the style with which you were writing. And Hesiod very much is in keeping with this style by evoking the muses when he first starts writing, to say that he is basically given the gift of being this incredible rhapsodist and this incredible storyteller because of them. It's essentially like a God-given gift thanks to the muses, who are these goddesses of the arts. Hello, think about Hercules, Disney's Hercules. When they describe the muses, they do that incredibly well. We are the muses, goddesses of arts and proclaimers of heroes. Like that is a very good description of what the muses are. And so he thanks the muses and he goes on and tells these epic poems, not only in style, but also in the way that he thanks the deities and he honors the deities in the way that he does it. So he's still an epic poet, despite his poems being nice, short, and concise. And we love a man that can write just really succinctly. It makes our lives a lot easier. In saying all of that, Hesiod is one of the most important authors that you have to read if you want to study mythology. There is technically a lot of text that will get more and more and more niche. Nonus was a great example of that. You're getting really niche, but I think it's one that you just should read. And I think if you take a mythology course and they don't mention Nonus, it's because they don't like fun. However, Hesiod is so vital. And the reason is because he acts as a counterbalance to Homer a lot of the time. So you will, I presume, oftentimes hear classes online, as well as if you go to a free lecture or just any lecture, actually paid lecture, free lecture, to talk about mythology where they discuss this topic, they will always say, Homer says this, but Hesiod says this. And that's because they do have a lot of discrepancies, despite them dealing with essentially the same subject matter. Obviously, Homer is going into the Trojan War, which Hesiod does not, but with regards to mythology and the gods, the lineages, all of that kind of stuff, and just the stories that end up getting passed down through Greek oral tradition and then written tradition, they have lots of differences between them. And this is really, really interesting because it means that we have to be hyper aware of the two of them, because this shows us that these two types of stories were circulating enough, right? Because if they weren't circulated familiar enough, then these texts wouldn't have been super popular. If something was so different, then, you know, everybody at the time would have been like, oh, no, less of this. So it has to be familiar enough, but different enough to keep people, you know, on the ball and looking that way. So an example of this is Aphrodite. She, I think, is probably the biggest example. Aphrodite, one of the 12 Olympian gods. We are so familiar with her because she is unbelievably important. And yet between Homer and Hesiod, who are writing around the same time, she has two completely different parentages. Parentages? Or just parentage? I'm not really sure. Anyways, regardless, if you go to Homer's Iliad, Aphrodite's mother is called Dione. In fact, we meet her in the narrative of the Iliad. That's her mother. She had an affair with Zeus. Boop, out popped Aphrodite. Contrary to this, Hesiod writes that Aphrodite is actually born from the severed genitals of Uranus. So this is completely different. That image that we have where she pops out of the shell, right? Like that is all from Hesiod. That's not from Homer at all. This idea of the sea foam and all of this, Hesiod. So just in that perfect example where we have one of the most important people of the Greek pantheon, two authors of the exact same time period do not agree when she was born, who her parents are, or anything like that. And there are lots of other little examples throughout Hesiod and throughout Homer where they differ quite a bit. So if you want to really start getting into mythological analysis, you really can't do that without having read both Homer and Hesiod. So he is absolutely one of the most important people that you have to read if you want to dive deep into mythology. If you don't, I guess it's okay. But I think that he's one of the requirements pretty much for all reading when it comes to Greek mythology and when it comes to finding those sources, because it is important that we know that these various different ideas of the stories existed around the same time. Which means, obviously, as we come to the end of this episode, it goes without saying that you guys can find all of the links to Hesiod in the description below. And this is not only for the physical copies of Hesiod. If you would like to buy those, I always link those kind of in the middle of the description, but right at the top, just underneath the donation link, you can find free access to Hesiod. And I always want to make this note on the channel that classics is always pushing to be more and more accessible, and we have some incredible companies, universities, whatever happens to be charities, that are really pushing for this to be accessible to everybody. So down below you can find links to Perseus, which is a University of Chicago resource, and it genuinely is phenomenal. This is not sponsored by them, it is just something that I think everybody should know about. But thank you guys so much for tuning into today's episode on Hesiod. I hope you enjoyed it and that you learned something. So thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time with more videos here on MoAn Inc. I'll see you then.